One of the challenges in working with storyline, though, is that, and using the stock characters, is that if, for instance, you've built the whole character set, you've built the whole story out, and then they come back and say, I don't like that character. I want to change it. I mean, you hope this never happens,
right?
But it does. And I actually, when things like that happen, that's when I'm glad I'm using Vyond, because Vyond has the capability of you saying this character here, substitute it with this character here. Nice. Change the color of a jacket. Done. It can be done in like 3 clicks.
Right.
And that's huge.
Here are 5 tips that will help instructional designers learn the skill of interactive video design. This comes from the conversation that I had with my friend Sandhya Lakhanpal of Redefine Instruction.
Can you dive a little bit into what kind of tools lend themselves to interactive stories? Like I know you mentioned Camtasia. Are there any other tools in the market that are really privy to this type of?
So for the interactive piece, so this is the decision pages where you come to a place and you've got to make a choice. I use Articulate Storyline, 360. That's my tool of choice, because I feel it's the most robust. Of course, you have to be able to handle, kind of multiple choice decisions, buttons. And in my case, I usually am using variables to track, what the decisions are that they make. So at the, possibly at the end, you need to give some sort of feedback or a count. It's good to have the variable ability. So that is the tool that I mainly use for the decision points, that's the structure that holds everything together. Within that, I might either use, possibly storyline characters if I was doing an interactive story, but because I focus more on interactive video, I tend to use Vyond for the animated videos when they're called for. And if it's a live video that's provided by the client, then I am going to use probably a tool like Camtasia to chop that up and then import just the specific pieces, maybe edited pieces of the movies, MP4s, into Storyline. So in either case, I'm always taking either an animated video pieces or live video pieces that are chopped up. I'm pulling them into Storyline and putting them on separate slides, and then you come to decision point. So that's kind of the way that I do my tools. Camtasia has the capacity for doing interactive video. I talk about that quite a lot on my YouTube channel, because a lot of people can't afford Storyline 360. It's a very expensive product. I mean, it's great, but it's expensive. So Camtasia is kind of like a cheaper way of doing it, because they have hotspots, so you can create interactive videos. They're just not quite as robust as I like. So for my client work, I always use Storyline 360.
Right. And all very well-known, easy to use, user-friendly tools, which is what I love about it.
Yeah.
What are the different types? So the big piece of interactive storytelling is the interactive piece, right? Where the learner has to do something. What are the different types of interactions that you have built into your videos or interactive stories?
So I tend to stick with a very simple structure for the interactive pieces. I don't do drag and drops and a bunch of crazy things. There's not a lot. There's no click and reveals. It's just because the decisions are so power packed from a business standpoint, they are very challenging decisions. So when you get to that place, you maybe have had a setup in which the characters, get it ramping up and realizing what the problem is, and then you come to a decision point, which is a static screen, and there's usually 2, maybe 3 buttons on it. And those buttons just very succinctly describe 3 different choices. And at the top, what next? That's that. It's as simple as that. And then the decision, all of the thought that came from those practitioner interviews, and I boiled it down to like 2 lines per button. That's where all of the thinking goes into it. And so then when you get to that decision from the user standpoint or the viewer standpoint, they get to that screen and it's like, dang, I don't know which one to pick. They all sound good, and they have to really think. And then I usually have a timer running with some noise, like ticking clock, right, to step up the pressure a little bit.
Exactly, and the gamification element.
There's a scoring element where it's like how many times you get it right on the first try. You can always try again. Right. But those are the things. That's the way that the decision points work. It's pretty much always the same, at least in the ones that I've been creating. I keep it simple because I find when you have too many different types of, from a user interface perspective, if you have too many different types of interactions, it's confusing to the learner. Then they got to figure out how to use this new interaction that you've created with a drag and drop when last time it was a multiple choice.
Right.
And who wants to have to think about those things when you're in a story? That's the whole point, is like, this is a story. You don't want those interactions to detract from the story or even take you out of the story. It happens in the middle, like a choose your own adventure. You come to the decision point, what do? And what you do determines what you see next.
I see.
And I think that's the key. So it's actually simple, but only because I did all that work in the background, figuring out what the decision should be.
Yeah. So talking about all the background work, you mentioned practitioner interviews. How do you ensure that this story or this scenario is going to work for this audience? Because our audience differs constantly, right? So how do you make sure that the story that you're choosing is going to jive with the audience that you're presenting it to?
Yeah, so much of that comes again from that action mapping methodology. I mean, I when I speak, first I talk usually to the SME. For instance, if the SME is a doctor, but the problem is about something that the nurses are doing, so the actual target audience is a nurse in a hospital setting, the doctor, I mean, I would interview them because they might be the SME, they kind of know, what should happen. But then I interview the practitioners who are the nurses. They're the people on the ground. They're the real audience members. And, you interview the best performers amongst that group, the best, maybe the head nurses, the ones who are actually doing the patient work, who can describe to you why things actually are not happening. The doctor might have no idea because he's not actually doing that work. So the key is to actually figure out who your audience is and to talk to those practitioners rather than only relying on the SME, because you want to be grounded in reality.
Right.
And then from that, there's a lot of things that Kathy Moore covers in her book, Map It, where she talks about you from those practitioner interviews, you can distinguish, is this an environmental problem? For instance, in that nurse scenario, the one that she uses in the book, I think it's a fabulous example. She says, if the problem is that the business problem is nurses are the sharps are not being disposed of properly, and so nurses are injuring themselves with sharps. What do you do when you get that injury? Do you pour betadine on the wound? Do you call the helpline, or do you wash it underwater? What do you do? So that's the choice. And the problem is that in the real hospital environment, part of the problem might be that the sharp disposal container is not mounted near the patient's bed. So here's the nurse working with the patient. When they come to dispose the sharp container is all the way across the room. Well, then, there's a good chance, that something could happen.
Right.
And so that's an environmental problem. And you identify that up front during these practitioner interviews. And then that's not going to be solved with training. You can have the best training in the world. If you don't solve the environmental issue, then it will never work. So it gives you the chance. Now you're more of a performance consultant, right? You're not just an order taker. You're the performance consultant. And as you're having this conversation, you can point out to the doctor or the head nurse, since this is a problem, could you guys take care of moving those sharp disposal containment units nearer to the patient bed? And they take care of that, and that eliminates, say, 50% of the problem right there. So that environmental piece is huge.
Okay.
And then you've got things that are like the knowledge gaps. Maybe they don't know what to do. That can be solved by training, probably. There could be a skill gap. Maybe they just haven't had enough practice disposing of the sharps. That can probably be solved by training. If you have a motivational problem, the nurses do not want to, dispose of the sharps properly. That's a whole nother thing. You might not be able to solve that with training. So I think what I love about action mapping is it solves the problem from a business perspective. But you as an instructional designer, you're only focused on the things that actually training can help. You're not trying to solve stuff that has to be solved some other way. Yeah, the peripheral, it's peripheral to us as trainers, but it's hugely important, probably maybe even more important for the business, for the organization.
Right.
So I like it. I like action mapping because it's very practical and it actually gets results in a business environment. Instead of just being in an L&D world, it opens your mind to how can I be a business consultant, performance consultant for this organization?
Right.
And that to me was a light bulb moment. Reading her book really.
Yes.
It changed my life.
Training's not the solution to every problem.
It's not. We don't want to admit that sometimes. It's kind of hard to admit, but it's really
But
not.
then when it doesn't close the gap, there are other things that are going on.
Yes.
And what you spoke to was that true front-end needs analysis where, it's not just the training that you're analyzing, the environment, the technology, the knowledge, the skill gap, everything which goes into it, feeds into how the decisions and the learning is going to be designed.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the characters. You talked about animated characters and you talked about storyline characters. Like, how do you go about designing the characters for a story? Are they inspired by real life people or are they completely fictitious?
Well, let's see. So there's a third type of character, and that is if there's a live video that's pre-existing that the client has. I have one of those on my portfolio where it shows a contractor, working, showing somebody how to do something.
Great.
So that's a live video. So there, the characters are established already because it's pre-existing video. So the live video is one type of thing where, you are working with the material you have and you're adding decisions to it. But for instance, with vyond, you can completely customize your character. I mean, you could down to the clothing they wear, you can have it be branded to the brand colors, like match the brand colors of the organization. So generally what I do is during those initial conversations with the SME and the practitioners, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking through, okay, so who should the main character be? And there's one protagonist, because if you have too many, it dilutes the story. So, I focus in on who should that main character be? They should be representative of the audience, somebody they can relate to. I, craft a couple of other characters. Usually I have to have a few other characters so there can be some kind of conflict or problem. Maybe it's a direct report. And vyond is great because they have so many characters to pick from. You can just choose like a couple choices, throw on different jacket colors on them, and just hand it to the practitioners or the SME and say, well, which one do you want? They pick one, and then I build from there. So vyond makes it really easy because it's like, a set thing. And in storyline, of course, you have a similar thing. They're less customizable, which is okay. But I mean, I tend to like to really customize my characters. So I can't get the storyline characters to move around. So,
right.
So that's one of the reasons that I don't usually work with storyline characters as much, but you can. And those characters, again, it's just a matter of having them pick who they want and going forward. I'd say one of the challenges in working with storyline though is that and using the stock characters is that if, for instance, you've built the whole character set, you've built the whole story out, and then they come back and say, I don't like that character, I want to change it. I mean, you hope this never happens,
right?
But it does. And I actually, when things like that happen, that's when I'm glad I'm using vyond, because vyond has the capability of you saying this character here, substitute it with this character here.
Nice.
Change the color of a jacket. Done. It can be done in like 3 clicks.
Right.
And that's huge. If your story is like, 7 minutes long and you've got like, 50 slides, you do not want to be in there like fixing each little thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's some advantages in my mind to using vyond, but storyline characters can work as well. You just have to nail the people down at the beginning. Say, hey, you choose this thing, that's in stone. Don't change it anymore. And hopefully they agree to it and you go on.
Right. Stories also come in different formats. A lot of stories start with reverse engineering, right? So 3 hours ago, 5 hours ago, and then they lead up to the main event. What are the different formats that you tend to use for interactive stories? Are there certain formats that lend better to interactive stories than others?
That's a very good question. So let me think. In terms of just the storytelling, you're sort of a creative director when you're creating an interactive story, right? I mean, within the realm, now, of course, it might be limited, like you can't have this thing be more than, say, 7 minutes long. So, you've got to work within that. So you can't have this huge backflash. But, you could have a flashback happen somewhere in the story as long as it fits. You're not Steven Spielberg, so you don't need to like have this huge, incredible like storytelling methodology. You need something that works to get engagement and to get the behavior change.
Right.
So for that reason, my stories tend to be more following the hero's journey, where you just start with a character that's having a bad situation of some type. There's some kind of an inciting incident, and then they have they might need a mentor, but they might not. I mean, it depends. And then, you just have your challenges, maybe 4 to 7 challenges. Those are the decision points. And then you've got a happy ending. Now, in that structure, what I just described, that is assuming that you're using what I call a mastery loop, where this is not a branching scenario in its truest form. You don't have like 5 different alternate endings. You've got one ending that's the happy ending, but at each decision point, you have three choices. And if they choose poorly, in this case, then you'll see the consequence play out, and then you'll have the chance to make the decision again. And then you go on to the next decision. So that is what I call a mastery loop structure. That is easier from a developer standpoint to create than to create something that has, say, 3 alternate endings.
Right.
The alternate ending methods, they are sometimes called for and they work, but it requires you to use variables to track what decisions they make. And at some point you need to split and choose which ending you're going to show them. And that is just a more complex version to create. I mean, I could do that. And I think that there are times that it's called for, sometimes it's not. And generally you want to do the simplest solution that fits.
In the next part of the series, I'll take you behind the scenes and reveal some of my interactive video design secrets. As soon as it's available, you'll see it here on this screen.